Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla on Monday said that his company is aiming to have a vaccine that targets the Omicron variant ready by sometime in March, but noted it was unclear if a vaccine targeting variants was necessary or how exactly it would be used. Just last month, the White House chief medical advisor, Dr. Anthony Fauci, said that he did not see a need for an Omicron-specific vaccine, saying that our booster regimens work against Omicron and there is no need for a variant-specific booster.
And amid a widespread testing shortage, school closures, and Biden's repeated claim that it's the pandemic of the unvaccinated, despite large numbers of the vaccinated population getting sick, the White House is losing credibility. According to NBC News, a half dozen former health policymakers, including some members of Biden's transition team, told the outlet that the Biden administration needs an urgent reset on its COVID strategy. The White House just announced a new testing coordinator, seemingly in response to the backlash. Tom Inglesby, director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. So that's a good thing, right? Testing coordinator?
I mean, I guess. Yeah. In the thread that Jen Psaki pointed to from Inglesby in the announcement, I think she pointed to a Bloomberg reporter's thread on the announcement. It is actually sort of conceding a lot of mistakes without conceding the mistakes. It's saying, we didn't have enough in September. We had a problem over the summer. Mm-hmm. This summer, testing is going to be better. And I think it's a similar thing with the question about the vaccine. Do we need variant-specific vaccines? It puts the White House in this position, and it puts Dr. Fauci, and America's sweetheart, in this position of having to say the vaccine works against the booster, so we don't need, or the booster works against this variant, so we don't need variant-specific boosters. So even though clearly it's not having its intended effect or purported effect in this case.
Well, what Fauci seems to be saying there is that it's okay to get a breakthrough case.
Right.
And as long as it doesn't develop into something serious or fatal. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we don't need a specific vaccine that deals with preventing you from being infected in the first place. That infection is okay, right. Which is interesting because it cuts a bit against the long COVID argument that he also makes, and that a lot of people are legitimately concerned about. People have that same concern about the vaccine, but they just look at it through a different prism. They say, okay, yes, I know tens of millions of people that have gotten the vaccine and are fine, but we don't know what the long-term implications of it are because it's brand new. We just can't know. And the same is true of long COVID, although there seem to be maybe significantly more cases of those long COVID. But then it gets into this American thing where people just start doubting, like, well, do you actually, this is just you being a freak. Lyme disease is not a thing. This is just you being a weirdo.
Right.
And people who suffer from all of these autoimmune disorders are very familiar with the kind of scorn that is foisted upon them. So then to hear Fauci say, we don't really need a specific variant one, suggests that long COVID is an acceptable risk.
An acceptable risk, yes, exactly. And that's not something, that is not an argument he makes in different contexts. Right. And of course, Pfizer would love to make a vaccine for every different variant.
Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Right. They would love that. But it does, I think.
Like the fashion industry.
Yes, right. Exactly. Yeah, the new fall vaccine, the new fall variant is in a
but also booster. Like the flu vaccine. Like right. To not joke about it. Like, yeah, the flu vaccine every year, they find what is the most prevalent variant, and then they re-engineer the vaccine so that it's most effective. And sometimes they hit it, sometimes they miss.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And so there are these competing interests at play in this question about whether we need variant-specific boosters and variant-specific vaccines that are really testing, I think, the White House's story on all of these things. And I think the same thing goes for testing. If you are bringing in somebody new, you're conceding that you need somebody new. And if you're considering all of this, and by the way, the big thing that's missing in this conversation is the question of transmissibility, right? So what is the effect that the boosters are having on transmissibility of Omicron? That should be front and center of this conversation, and it just isn't.
Right. You have to just deduce from the fact that if it reduces the amount of time that you're sick, and it reduces your chances of getting infected, it doesn't stop you from getting infected, but it reduces your chances, then it has some reductive power against spread, but clearly not a ton if you just look at the fact that everyone is getting it. On the question of variants too, as we think about COVID as something endemic, there are going to be new people constantly being born and getting vaccinated around the planet. There are still billions of people that haven't been vaccinated. So I guess my question would be, why continue to produce an alpha-specific vaccine if alpha isn't really around anymore?
Right.
Okay, fine, it might be good enough, but why settle for good enough? Like, why not do the one that's like prevalent?
Yeah.
But it moves so fast, this one, by the time March comes around and they finally have it ready, we might be like, yeah, Omicron's gone now. Now it's Deltacron, or whatever is whipping around at that point.
No, exactly. And this week, hundreds of kids walked out of Brooklyn Tech to protest the continuation of in-person school during the Omicron wave and called for a remote option and safer COVID precautions. One opinion piece in Politico by an Oakland mother, Rebecca Bodenheimer, reflects on the frustration she felt over homeschooling. She eventually led an effort to push the school district to be more transparent about the process of reopening, particularly in negotiations with the teachers union. Bodenheimer's identity as a leftist turned school reopening advocate illustrates how people across the political spectrum are so frustrated with policies in place for schools. This is happening, of course, in Chicago, where you have Lori Lightfoot now pitted against the teachers union in this bizarre sequence of events. And it goes to what you were just saying about this could be March, Omicron could be over, and we are now have all of these preparations in place for something that has already passed. I think that's a frustration that so many people are feeling in their schools, that the precautions that are being taken are either not appropriate for the moment, not enough for the moment. I mean, it's all over the place, but things change so quickly, and our system doesn't seem to be built to change quickly along with them.
Right, and this is a good example of how you have people pushing in both directions.
Right.
Because you have those students pushing in the opposite direction, saying that they want a remote option, because the virus is having its say in this question. And so for a lot of students, they're back in school in New York, but many of their teachers are not. And so they're being shuffled into these gigantic auditoriums, and they're not being taught anything. It's more just like a place where they go during the day. And a lot of parents are like, fine. Give them a place to go during the day.
Babysit them.
That's what we want. Although for high school kids, you can leave them at home. That's a different question. But yeah, the best wishes and the best laid plans of mice and men here are running into COVID, because you can say, we want the schools open, but if the teachers are like, no, I'm actually sick, or if half the kids are actually sick, like tested positive, then there's only so much you can do.
Right. Or teachers live with people who are immunocompromised, or maybe they are themselves. It's a difficult question, obviously with no easy answers, because we've been going through it for 2 years without easy answers. I do think, though, that people are coming around, especially on the left, and that Politico op-ed is a good example of it, to the reality that evidence suggests this has been a disaster for children. When you're looking at the evidence as how it has affected them, shutting schools down has been a disaster. And I think I do think more people are at least coming around to that realization.
Yeah, very much.
Which is, I guess that's a net positive in all of this. If you need some good news today, people are starting to agree with that. We will have more Rising for you right after this.